on the front page of the Australian, and they have an article about the living wage. And the Australian Chamber of Commerce Industry has released some research where they've said that if this proposal by the ACTU to introduce a living wage of about 60% of the median wage was introduced, that would cost businesses and the economy $8 billion. It would also cost jobs, and it would probably end up in business closures. Now, this is going to be a big debate, I think, that will dominate the public discourse this year. And the issue is that if this living wage argument is actually just an increase to the minimum wage by stealth. And we've got to look at some facts here. The minimum wage in Australia is the third highest in the OECD, so it's a comparatively very high minimum wage. But these minimum wage increase arguments are actually a way of blocking people's entry into the workforce. We have 700,000 people looking for jobs, and if we're putting up the wages through artificial means like increasing the minimum wage, we're actually then putting a barrier in front of people who do want to enter the workforce and who otherwise could if employers could pay them a little less than the ACTU is asking through the 60% of the median wage.
I hear what you're saying, but we also have a social balance. Yes, the minimum wage, as you say, might be at that level, but it's still pretty low, and lots of working families struggle to make ends meet. Well,
it's also, I think, important to note that only 8% of workers are actually on the minimum wage. Most workers are on much higher than that through the award system. So the sort of idea of minimum wage being what the vast majority of people are being paid is a complete furphy.
Well, if that's the case, then the figure of it costing $8 billion doesn't seem to stack up, does it?
So
if there are so few on it.
So $8 billion is the figure that would be generated through the adoption of the ACTU's proposal, which would increase the minimum wage up to 60% of the median wage. But I do think we need to also take into account the inherent dignity of being in the workforce and working. And the Fair Work Commission is of course asked to consider that when it determines wage rates, that this isn't just about giving people more and more money. There's actually an inherent dignity in being part of a workforce and participating in...
It's only dignified if you end up with a decent wage.
Well...
Isn't it?
Of course you should be paid appropriately, but you shouldn't be paid so much that the employer then goes out of business. Then you don't have a job at all.
That's the debate, and that'll be interesting this year. Does it mean that if employers have to pay more money, somehow they'll go out of business? We've been seeing a phenomenal increase in business profits over the last year, 30% increase in the last year to March. Did that translate into more money for workers? It would seem not. They only went up by, what, 1.5%? So it's a false equivalence, potentially.
Well, ultimately, we've got to look to the experience we're seeing in the United States, where the dramatic corporate tax cuts have actually driven some significant wage rises. You've got many, many companies giving one-off bonuses, but also continual wage rises there. And there's been a lot of research, in particular, Professor Richard Holden of the University of New South Wales has done some significant research into this and said that it's much more important, rather than increasing minimum wages, it's much more important to drive this company tax agenda forward in order to increase that will drive increases in wages, particularly for young people, for women and for low-skilled people.